Genetics matter a lot. Whenever you do something, whether it's lifting weights, reading a book, watching big men oil up on social media,
Are you winning, son?
your genetics will play a big role in how you respond to the stimulus you receive. You have definitely seen people who get more or less out of the same workouts, how some people can store less body fat on their stomach, some store more in the face. If you lift weights but you have a high production of the muscle-inhibiting hormone myostatin, then you might not build as much muscle as somebody else. Or perhaps you don't have the right muscle fiber types, the right muscle shape, joint shape, or something else which causes your results to suffer compared to somebody else. Across sports, we often look towards the genetic elite, somebody who looks or seems like they're perfectly built for the exact sport they're doing. In bodybuilding, you might look at Phil Heath with some of the roundest muscles on the planet. In powerlifting, you might look at John Hack, who was a world champion powerlifter at a young age, then took PEDs and became arguably the greatest powerlifter ever. In football, you have Ronaldo. In sprinting, you have Usain Bolt. In long distance running, you have a lot of people from Kenya who have longer legs, short torsos with narrow joints, which makes them super efficient at running marathons. In marketing, you have this guy. Now, the term genetics is actually the study of passing genes, so most people, myself included, don't even use it correctly. But I'll just keep calling it that, otherwise people will just think I'm talking trendy fabric. So what really is a gene? Well, first you have DNA, which makes up the threads or building blocks of chromosomes. Humans usually have 23 pairs of these, and they're found in nearly every cell in your body. They basically function as an instruction manual, guiding your cells on how to operate and to what extent. Now, genes are very specific sequences of DNA, which is why people can have different traits, as these sequences are sort of decided based on your parents and which genes they have that are dominant or not. But that's all the boring stuff, so what actually happens that causes differences in muscle building potential, strength, looks, etc.? Well, first you got the muscle fibers themselves. I know some of you are probably dragging your Doucette to this picture, but it's a perfect example. Two guys training very similarly with totally different muscle mass. Now, you probably heard of muscle fiber types, but let's break down what they actually are. We mainly divide them into two separate categories, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 fibers are built for endurance, they have high blood supply, lots of mitochondria in relation to muscle size, and they mainly use fat for fuel. But they're smaller, they don't produce a lot of force, and they're very slow to contract.
The only thing slower than Brian Shaw is a wet Brian Shaw.
Type 2 fibers are the opposite. They're bigger, more explosive, produce higher force, and they're more efficient at using quick energy sources like creatine phosphate and glycogen. The trade-off is that they burn out a lot faster than me after walking a flight of stairs. Technically, these also have subtypes like 2A, 2X, and 2B, but the big idea is simple. Type 1, endurance, slow and steady. Type 2, power, speed, and gasping for air after about 5 reps. But here's why this matters, because genes help determine how much of each muscle type you have. Yes, you can always train to get more of one or the other, but your natural fiber ratios heavily affect whether you're built for marathons or deadlifting small cars, and you can't really do much about that. A pro marathon runner from Kenya will never become as swole as Ronnie Coleman, even if they train the same. But another thing a lot of people like to mention in the conversation of building muscle and genetics is myostatin, which is often referred to in the conversation of the Hercules gene. Now, myostatin is a protein made by your own muscle cells, which tells your muscles to not get any bigger, basically like a built-in version of your mom. Now, myostatin doesn't actually break down muscle, it just tells them enough is enough. But some people have a deficiency in myostatin, or a mutation that causes low myostatin production. A great visual example of this is the Belgian blue ox, which has been bred for hundreds of years to produce as little myostatin as possible. And you can tell how much of a difference it makes, because these guys don't even lift and they still look like 5 Ronnie Colemans packed into a steak. But jokes aside, we have seen real-life examples of myostatin deficiencies in people. In 2004, there was this big article made about this newborn kid in Germany who had a mutation on both copies of the gene that controls myostatin production, causing the kid to have almost twice as much muscle as a regular kid and much less body fat, all because of a mutation that was halfway carried down from his mother. Now, people like Eddie Hall and many bodybuilders also claim to have a reduction in myostatin, and that is probably true to a certain degree, but very rarely do we see somebody with a genetic mutation which causes complete inhibition of myostatin, and I don't think we've ever seen any of them strive to actually become a pro bodybuilder. And there is footage of really buff kids who probably have some form of myostatin deficiency themselves, and the difference it can make if your goal is catalyst to build muscle is tremendous, but it can also cause a lot of health issues. Now, we've all had a few kids in high school who were just jacked despite not doing anything special with their training or nutrition. Some people are simply able to pack on more muscle than others. The cool thing about this though is that you won't really know how good your genetics are until you put in the work yourself. Yes, some people start out a bit flabby, some start out skinny, but that doesn't mean that those people can't get an incredible physique if they just lift weights, consume adequate protein, sleep well, etc. What a lot of people misunderstand though is how much your starting point is affected by your genes. For example, somebody who started their fitness journey out as fat might think they have poor genetics for building muscle or losing fat, but not take into account anything else like their upbringing, their parents' upbringing, or cultural background, which might affect what they eat or what they do. And many misunderstand how much genes actually contribute to how fat is stored, when in reality, the amount of fat you store is for most people almost exclusively up to lifestyle. What is very genetic though is how you respond to certain types of stimuli. Some people are more easily addicted to tasty food. Some have more receptors in their brain which can affect how much of a dopamine hit you get from eating excessively tasty foods. Some even have a higher production of the hunger hormones leptin and ghrelin, which tells your brain if you're full or hungry. Now, these things don't automatically cause you to gain more weight, but they do make it more mentally difficult to remain in something like a calorie deficit or to avoid binge eating. Your genes can also contribute to your metabolism, but it's to a very small degree in contrast to what many people think. Usually only a few hundred calories at most. Many also misinterpret how much they're eating. Actually, a study published by the New England Journal of Medicine found that people with obesity underestimated their calorie intake by 47% and overestimated their physical activity by 51%, showing that obesity measured in that study didn't come from a slow metabolism, but simply a matter of lifestyle habits which put participants in a big calorie surplus without them realizing. But if you want to dig really deep, you will find that your genes also determine your work ethic, how mentally resistant you are to cravings, or how much feeling hungry affects you. Now, you can always improve all of these in some aspects, regardless of your genetic makeup, but virtually everything is affected by your genes, and you cannot change that. You can always build muscle, but your response to training might not be the same as somebody else, and it might not end up looking the same. For example, Dr. Mike Israetel has a lot of muscle, but he still doesn't look as visually appealing as somebody like Sam Sulek.
The workout might not be rocket science, but this pump was definitely made in a lab.
Though we do have a lot of research to know how most people will generally respond to training volume, effort, intensity, etc., there are still large individual variations. Some people respond better to high volume training, some respond better to low volume training. Some get easily hurt during maximal loads and should train more submaximally. Some have a worse ability to recover, as in their sleep might be crap, or they're more susceptible to high calcium ion fatigue when training. Some have brain damage. So while your genetics may be limiting you in some way, the way I like to look at things is just that your genetics are your individuality. And to maximize what you get out of them, you must individualize, not just your training, but almost everything in life. Your line of work, your hobbies, your food intake. Most things will differ between people, and you have to find a way that works for you. Now, most people might not differ a lot, since most are fairly genetically average, though some are better at certain things, and I think we should ultimately strive to max out what we can while doing what is fun. Like, it doesn't matter if your genetics suck for bodybuilding, you can still train hard and do what you can in the gym. Yeah, you'll never win the Mr. Olympia, but that's never a good reason to not give it a go regardless. But hey, maybe you do better as a runner, or a cyclist, or a climber, or a model. Genetics can also determine what you do with this video, whether you learn something from it, or don't think much of anything I just said. Or maybe your genetics are forcing you to laugh at this Blue Lobster meme.
Thank you, Greg.
Either way, I hope you realize that yes, genetics are important, but you shouldn't really give them much thought, because in the end, you can change them, at least for right now. But maybe in the future, we'll be able to remove these so-called unwanted or bad genes from our gene pool. Maybe we can change how we look or how we respond, what tan we have, etc. But for now, don't pay it any attention, because blaming your genetics for your weight, your strength, or your calves is silly, because you can't change the cards you've been given, only how you play the game. But what do you guys think? Do people overthink their genetics, or do people just downplay the effect that their genes have on how they live? Should you even worry about them at all? Or should people simply choose their parents more carefully? Let me know down below in the comments what you think. And if you want personalized coaching with training plans, meal plans, weekly check-ins, and follow-up by me, check out the first link in the description. And I'll see you all next time.